This is Mid-Morning. I'm Kerri Miller. And when flutist Alison Young recorded that music that you're hearing right now, she was an acclaimed performer. She toured Europe with orchestras. She won praise for her tone and her technique. And she thought a long life of playing music lay ahead of her. But in 1999, Alison began to experience stiffness and cramping in her hands. Her fingers would curl away from the instrument no matter how much she concentrated on playing it, and her muscles would tighten into knots. She was eventually diagnosed with focal dystonia, a disorder that's stricken other high-profile musicians, and she learned that it was the third most common movement disorder in the country. At first, she thought she'd go to physical therapy and she would just work through it, but Alison discovered that although she was convinced that she was defined by her flute playing, that she was going to have to relinquish her professional career and fill her life with other things. While she no longer performs music herself before large audiences, she still thrills to the beauty and the power of classical music performed by others, and she shares that insight about it with the listeners of Minnesota Public Radio's classical music service on Saturday and Sunday mornings. And she joins me this morning in the studio to talk about her career and her second career and everything else. So, Alison, good to have you here.
Kerri, it's great to be here. I'm a total mid-morning fanatic and a Kerri Miller wannabe.
Oh, come on. Thanks. Thanks for coming in. You know, I want to play a little bit of music here while I talk to you about what the music has meant. I noticed when you were hearing that introductory music that you started to move your fingers and you started to kind of move to the rhythm of the music. And I wonder if you still imagine yourself playing.
Oh, absolutely. And you know, what's fascinating about this condition that I have is it's almost like it's a dream. It's like a past of my life, a part of my life that's gone. So I think back to it. That's another woman. She used to be able to do all of that. And sometimes, you know, when I'm on the air and I'm introducing music, you know, I'll dance along and I enjoy it. No one can see in the studio, of course. And I'm enjoying the music too, but it isn't anything that I can physically do anymore. So it's remembering back to another time. Very difficult to have lost that. I mean, you gave such a beautiful introduction. I think that's just about right. Slowly my fingers were curling in. We're doing this kind of odd movement. And I'd never heard of dystonia. I never knew that this could happen to somebody. So I thought, well, maybe I'm tired, maybe I'm over-practicing, maybe whatever. And I would just kind of try to work through it and go along with it. Maybe they're moving a little bit funny. Well, I'll just make them come down on the flute harder. And that just didn't work after a certain point.
This music is a piece that you performed and recorded, obviously, behind us. And I listened to it and I think how quickly your fingers must have been moving and the dexterity that takes.
Well, you know, it's interesting because technique was always something that was absolutely easy for me, something that came very natural. I'm pretty athletic, and so when you're learning an instrument at a young age, you know, fourth grade is when I first picked up the flute. Some people take to the music first, sort of the musicality of it, the artistry of it. For me, it was much more the physicality of it. So moving my fingers on the instrument, I learned my scales the fastest. In fact, there's a very funny story. When I was in, I think, 6th grade, we had a contest in band to see who could play through all of the major and minor scales the fastest. You know, I mean, it was insane. And of course, I won. You know, I was very determined, and I could get all the notes going because I was very technically adept. And that's part of what's funny about this particular condition coming on, or curious, I guess, or tragic even, that this would strike me because that was not the area that was weak for me. That was not the area that was difficult. It was much more, you know, my tone or my musicality was something that I really had to think about more. So that's how
the
that worked.
Dexterity always came so easily.
Dexterity always really came easily. And funny, I was thinking about the Fuga e Misterio. That's that piece, Fugue and Mystery by Astor Piazzolla that we were just listening to a moment ago. And such a wonderful piece by Piazzolla. That has all of the properties of a fugue, just like Bach or something. You know, you have the theme and then the piano comes in, but it gets very jazzy and stuff. When I was learning this piece, and I've taught it to several students too, playing the technique of it was never, 1, 2, 3, 4, not sort of very rhythmic.
Mm-hmm.
I would always think in larger chunks of notes, or sort of in direction, the larger direction of it. And it sort of hit two things. I mean, one hand, it was hitting, making sure that you could play all the notes without tightening up, without holding onto the flute too tightly.
Right.
But also, it helped you to think more in terms of a longer line. So that was the way I brought the musicality into it. I mean, obviously, by the time I learned this, I was a much better flutist than I was in fourth grade, starting out. And so that was the area that not only was I succeeding at, but also I was able to impart to my students and to other flutists in master classes and things, was a way to use your technique very successfully to make music sing.
When you first noticed this come on, and you first were feeling the symptoms, was it just kind of I'm not able to grip the flute or hold the flute the way I once could. My fingers aren't moving as easily. I mean, you obviously had no idea in the beginning that this would be that it would be career ending, but I'm curious about what you thought as you first felt it coming on.
Well, one of the classic ways that dystonia presents itself, my understanding is that there's no pain involved,
mm-hmm.
and it shows up very slowly and kind of can come and go in the beginning. The very first time I noticed anything odd, I picked up my flute. I was sitting with one of my closest friends. We were both playing a Mozart Requiem. And we were chit-chatting away, and then I picked up my flute to play, and I said, I don't know where my hands go. I don't know where to put my hands. I mean, it was just this sort of fleeting moment. And I've heard people describe the very first time when they have Parkinson's, they describe the first time they see a tremor.
Mm-hmm.
They see it, and they think, well, what was that? And then it may go away and not come back for months. That was the very, very first inkling. And over a span of several months, 6, 8 months, something like that, I would notice something a little bit amiss. One finger would, rather than going up and down on the key, it would sort of brush the key, kind of pull back. They actually call it flexion rather than extension in the muscle. Mm-hmm. So the finger wouldn't come down and make the key go down, but rather sort of slide on it. And I would see it do that, and I think, well, that's sort of strange. But for some reason, I'm a very curious person, but it never occurred to me to think, why is it doing that?
You know, what's interesting about that is the way you describe it also almost as something outside of yourself. Mm-hmm. I would see, I mean, you really weren't aware mm-hmm. until you saw it happen. Right. Is that right?
Well, that's why it's a neurological condition rather than a sort of a muscular, right. Like a tendonitis or something, which actually the doctor who saw me when it really got too bad thought that maybe I had a pinched nerve, and that was making my hand react in an odd way. But when we cleared all of the issues out that might have caused that, it wasn't that, because they just did their own thing. And that is a very strange experience. I mean, you can almost think of it as spiritually or this sort of sense that you're not completely in control of your body.
I mean, it's like an opera singer developing throat cancer or something. I mean, you're not going to die from this, but it's going to change the way you define your career and the way you defined yourself.
That's right.
How did you, when you started thinking about what am I after the fact that I'm a flute player, what kinds of things were you thinking about what your new self-identity would be?
Well, it was a very sad time in my life, and very, very, very difficult. I had a boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, and he stayed with me and helped me through that time. One of the things that I did, and this is curious, because when you're a musician, you start and commit yourself at a very young age. So you're growing up through the entire period that you're developing your career. At 15 years old, I was convinced I was going to be a professional flutist for the rest of my life. And imagine how different you are at 15. You're not even an adult yet.
Right.
So I was trying to remember a time before I played the flute. What did I like? Who was I? What kinds of things did I do? And even when I was committing myself to the flute, at 15, I went to Interlochen Arts Academy, which is when I, decided that flute was going to be my major. But I still was a good student, and I still wrote, and I still sang, and I acted. I mean, I did a lot of other things. And I was trying to sort of search back to, finding your bliss, trying to find something that would make me happy. But then, of course, there was the concern of how am I going to make a living? I mean, I had to find something that I could do that would earn me money rather than just working at a store or something like that.
But how interesting that even in your 12, 13, 14 years old, I mean, this is when your personality, is forming, when you're deciding who am I, really, all defined by your music.
Yeah.
I mean, what was there when you went back to say, what else do I love? What else am I about? What was there?
Well, the thing that I latched onto was to write. That's what I started doing. I wanted to write, which is kind of odd because it's not really a performance, which is basically what a flutist is. But it's expressive, it's creative, it stimulates the mind and my curiosity. So that seemed to be the thing that I latched onto, and that was actually my avenue to get into radio. I started writing. I took a class in Houston at the Imprint Literary Society, and I met a writer who was writing for the Chronicle and got me some gigs. I got some stringer work with the Houston Chronicle sort of right away. And, when you're a musician, you are so dedicated. You have to practice and no stone left unturned. So, I mean, talk about someone who made sure I had all my ducks in a row. Everything was right. So I got work there, and I thought, well, this is it. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a journalist. I'm going to be a writer. And I started taking some courses at San Jacinto College, and it was very funny because we were on the paper, and the editor, I was the assistant editor. The editor was 19, and I was like 38.
College.
But I that gave me it gave me something to do, and it really used another part of my mind that I wouldn't say it had languished, because I've written all of the program notes for my concerts and the program notes in my CD, and I taught. Communication was always a part of my part of my career and part of my life. So I knew that this made sense. But writing is very lonely too. I mean, you're not in contact with people as much. I mean, unless you're interviewing, I guess. So I was networking. I was trying to get people together, and my stepfather and I had a conversation about it. And he said, you need to talk to everyone you know in Houston, anyone who has any connection to journalism or to writing, and ask them, what do you think I should do? So I contacted a friend of mine who is the CEO of Houston Public Radio, and just said, can we have a conversation? I said, I don't know if you know, but I've had to retire from flute playing. And I'm trying to find something to do. I'm very positive. And what am I going to do? And he said, well, this would be a good place. You could do an internship here in the newsroom.
You were really starting over.
I was starting over. I mean, I'm trying to think exactly how old I was, 30, 38, 39.
That had to be humbling. I mean, you...
Yes.
As I said in the introduction, you were acclaimed in your field, and now you're turning around and saying, I'm going to admit I don't know a whole lot, and I'm going to be a lowly intern at public radio.
And you don't get paid to be an intern, too. Little known fact, not there. But it was wonderful. It was humbling. I think the entire experience, I guess there's a spiritual element to it. I mean, for me, letting go and saying my dystonia was really terrible. It was really bad. I did everything I could to try to play still, and I did. I took time off and then went back to work, but I couldn't make it through it, and it was getting worse, and the joy was leaving my life. I mean, that really was the crux of it. So my choice was to say, okay, I can let go, and there's a lot of courage surrounding that there's going to be something on the other side after all of that music, after all of that love, after something that, like you said, it defined. I mean, defining isn't. I'm not crazy about that word. I almost think of it as the flute was, an extension of one of my arms. I mean, it was. Yeah. I don't have a very good singing voice. I mean, it's adequate. I can sing in choirs. I don't want to sing alone. But the flute was my voice. The flute was the microphone, the megaphone or whatever. It was the way I expressed myself, and I was good at it, and really liked it. So it was hard to let go.
If you're listening in this morning on Mid-Morning, Alison Young is with us today. She's the newest host at Minnesota Public Radio's classical music service. You'll hear her on Saturday and Sunday mornings from 8 to noon. In the studio this morning to talk about what prompted that career change to go from a life really dedicated to music and flute playing. She says at 15, she decided that she was going to be a professional flute player. She experienced initial symptoms of what turned out to be a neurological disease that forced her to give up her music. And we're talking about that transition, as she says that at some point she had to decide what was going to be on the other side of that life of music. So we're talking about all of that. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-242-2828. In the metro area, 651-227-6000. And if you're with us online, we know a lot of you listen like that, and you want to get in on the discussion, go to minnesotapublicradio.org and click on Send a Question to Michael in Edina. Hi, Michael. You're on Mid Morning.
Oh, good morning. This is a really therapeutic conversation for me to hear because my life story is quite similar to this in that I started playing the violin at age 4, and I got to echo totally what Alison's saying about it. Becomes so deeply ingrained in your self-image and your identity. It's more than just a profession or a way of occupation. It's a total way of life. Mm-hmm. And when I was in my 20s, I started experiencing some problems too. That I ended up searching for 3 years of the medical community was not very far advanced in understanding musicians' mechanics back then. But I finally got a diagnosis, and I had 2 surgeries, and then was out of music for a while because I was left with an impairment. And it took me about 8 years before I was able to play well enough. I actually switched to the viola, and now have a job in music. I never thought I'd make a living in music again. But I also had a little stint in public radio, just like Alison did. I worked in construction. I sold insurance.
Oh my gosh! Wow, Michael.
It was traumatic to go through all those different. I never really let go of being a musician that whole time. By the way, it was something that just no matter what I tried, I think I still had one hat. I was always still wearing the musician's hat the entire time.
Well, when you're not, let me ask you this, Alison. That's interesting that Michael would say that. When you're not playing, do you still think of yourself as a musician?
Well, of course. I mean, I'm a musician still. I'm on the air talking about music. I understand the music. I'm a music host. I'm a musicologist. I'm a music presenter.
But that's different from being a musician, isn't it?
Yeah. It's a very good question. I mean, it's a fine line. I think I want to get to answer that question a little bit from another angle. One of the things that really surprised me is that I would want to have anything to do with music after the loss. I mean, it was just absolutely like my child had died, mm-hmm. and I knew I needed to do something else. I was going to go back to school and become a lawyer or go into business school or something. And so the happenstance that I was interning in the newsroom, but they also had a job on air. It was one shift a week, and I learned the whole thing with the music and the board and the whole routine. I mean, it's pretty much what I do here, just on a different scale. And I was so surprised that I liked it so much. I mean, I don't think that I would be a very good conductor necessarily, and I actually pursued, right after I got diagnosed, I pursued trying to teach at a university and mm-hmm. teach full time. But it's very difficult for me to teach and not demonstrate on the flute. I find it hard to describe what I need, and a lot of times that was my crutch in a way, was to be able to demonstrate to my students how to do what I needed, and it was just, the joy was kind of leaving that area. So I was very surprised that I would want to stay in it. So our last caller was talking about, he kept the hat on.
Right.
I mean, I've kept the hat on as well, and it's been very joyful for me.
Was there a time when you didn't think you'd be able to listen to music?
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. And there still are some pieces that I put on the air that I get a little teary, But it's a process.
Why?
Well, the very last piece I played professionally was Dvorak 8, which is this just gorgeous symphony. And it begins with this wonderful cello tune, and then the flute plays a solo. I mean, I'm almost getting I sort of teared up right now. It's so joyful and so hopeful, kind of innocent in a way. It's just a beautiful solo. And I remember it's one of the first pieces I also played as a professional when I was very young. I was substituting one year as principal flute with the Toledo Symphony of all orchestras. Very, very good orchestra, though. Excellent players there because I could draw all these wonderful players from the nearby universities and stuff. And we played that. I was still in college, and I just got the piece. It's one of those things where I did it well. I understood it. It worked. And then it was the last thing I did. And, with I was playing all these alternate fingerings and my flute was built in all these different ways, but I made it through it. And it was so the very last note is in D major, the happy chord. And so when I put it on, at first it was hard. It was like, that hurts to be away from that. Now it's a little bit nostalgic. It's like looking back and saying, that was a great time of my life, and I'm glad I had it.
Do you still dream about playing the flute?
No, and that's an interesting question. I have a friend who's also a flutist who had to resign from a major orchestra, and she told me that when she dreams, she plays perfectly in her dreams. I have not experienced that. I have a complete disconnect from what it felt like to play with ease and comfort. I should mention that I can still play the flute. I do often take it out and play it. My hands just move in odd positions, and
always or always now.
Yeah, I can't rely on them to move evenly, even if I had a metronome going at a very slow tempo and I wanted to play a C major scale and I'm lifting each finger at a time. I can't be sure that they're going to come up when I require them to come up. They may quiver a little or move a little. So what I do if I'm going to play, in fact, on New Year's Eve, I played with some friends. I mean, we're just having fun. We had a couple glasses of champagne and made it much more fun. And my fingers are curved and bent and hit most of the keys, but my tone is fine. So it sort of sounds pretty, but we're not sure she's really playing all the right notes. And that's still wonderful. It's just a matter of that's not really good enough to be in a professional level orchestra. So,
to Irene in Mankato. Good morning. You're on Mid Morning.
Hello. I was wondering if you had ever tried utilizing the Alexander technique that I know many performers do to help with the tension in their body and better use of their body.
Allison, what is that?
Alexander technique. I'm not a professional or a practitioner, but essentially it is, as the listener described it, it's a method of teaching body movement to best utilize, to be as efficient with your movements. I mean, we tend to sort of, like I am right now, I'm kind of hunched over the microphone, and we sort of reach forward, and especially if we're playing an instrument, it requires so much strength, but it's very, very small movements, so we tend to stress our bodies. The Alexander technique tends to teach us to use our whole body to feel that we're being lifted when we play. Yes, there's a fantastic practitioner in Houston that I worked with quite a bit, Christine Lidval. She was just glorious. The only thing is that focal dystonia is not, in my understanding of it, it is not related to the way I'm using my muscles. It's a neurological disorder.
So if you had never been a flute player, but you were doing something else with your hands, were you still prone to this, or is it because of the way you had used your hands for so long?
I think that the jury's still out on precisely what causes it. Some of the understanding is that it is genetic. There's a genetic predisposition to develop dystonia, and you probably won't do it if you're not doing finite motor skills, finite movements, which are small movements. Writers get it. They actually called it writer's cramp. That's the true terminology. It's not that your hand hurts. It's that your hand can't be kept still or moving. The first time it was ever noticed in history was by scribes. Scribes would develop a dystonia. Flutists, painters, especially if they're doing very delicate miniatures or something like that, develop it. It also has shown up other parts of the body on musicians, in the throat, in the tongue, in the jaw. I have a friend who just wrote me recently. She has it in her mouth, which is, of course, really terrible for a flutist because you can't even really create a lovely sound. At least I still have a fairly decent tone.
Right.
And of course, dystonia, focal dystonia, is part of a larger group of illnesses or conditions, I guess is what they're called, neurological conditions. I'm not an expert on all of the different ones, but there's one where people can't control the closing of their eyes, their necks twist, their leg drags. One of the treatment methods has been Botox injections.
And you tried that, didn't you?
I did try
your
it.
hands.
Yes, and the pioneer in the field, Joseph Shenkovic, is at Baylor College of Medicine. I mean, he was right there in Houston, and I went to him. And he takes out this big needle that he's going to put right in your hand, and it was a little scary. It didn't hurt at all, but the scariest part of being there, it's the Parkinson's and Movement Disorder Clinic at Baylor College of Medicine, was seeing all of the other people with terrible dystonias in their bodies that are just, they're curled up, they're in really awkward positions, and the Botox is the answer for them to have a normal life. So in the large scheme of things, medically, I mean, I have something very, very minor.
Alison Young with us in the studio this morning. We're going to break for news. When we come back, hear some of her performances as well, and talk further about life after performing the flute. What happens now? 1-800-242-2828 if you want to join our conversation. 651-227-6000. Listening to us online, go to minnesotapublicradio.org. Click on Send a Question. Back in a moment to the newsroom and Perry Finelli. Hi, Perry.
Hi, Kerri. A Somali official says U.S. helicopter gunships have attacked suspected al-Qaeda terrorists hiding in Somalia. The attack comes a day after U.S. Special Operations Forces launched at least 2 airstrikes against suspected al-Qaeda members in Somalia. Officials in Iraq say 50 militant fighters were killed by U.S. and Iraqi soldiers during a battle in Baghdad. Meanwhile, the Turkish Foreign Ministry says 32 people died after a cargo plane carrying Turkish construction workers crashed in an airport near Baghdad. A Houston jury is deliberating whether to sentence Tyrone Williams to death for his role in the nation's deadliest human smuggling attempt. Williams was convicted in connection with the deaths of 19 illegal immigrants. The gas-like odor that hung over Manhattan streets is gone, but city officials are looking at New Jersey as the source. While the origin has not been pinpointed, one agency says it's pretty sure the source is along New Jersey's industrialized waterfront. The search for the best company to work for apparently ends with Google. The company tops Fortune's annual list of the 100 best companies to work for. Dropping from first place to second on the list is Genentech. Opening statements are scheduled in Gulfport, Mississippi today in a lawsuit stemming from unpaid insurance claims from Hurricane Katrina victims. Meanwhile, the first group of volunteers leaves the St. Cloud, Minnesota area this weekend to help a Mississippi town recover from last year's devastating hurricanes. The Hattiesburg Community Partnership will be sending teams to Mississippi over the next 4 months to help people in St. Cloud's adopted city of Hattiesburg rebuild from Hurricanes Katrina and Rita. Authorities in Crow Wing County are still mystified about what happened to a woman whose nude body was found at the bottom of a lake with a 25-pound metal weight anchoring her down. Investigators from the State Bureau of Criminal Apprehension are trying to determine whether the death of 61-year-old Nancy Hessner was a suicide, assisted suicide, or murder. Partly sunny skies, the state forecast today with high temperatures of 15 to 25 degrees. Right now, the Twin Cities reporting some flurries under mostly cloudy skies and the temperature reading at 19 degrees. It's 10:34. This is Minnesota Public Radio News.
For 40 years, you've invited Minnesota Public Radio into your home. Now come visit ours. You and your family are invited to a 40th anniversary open house celebration at MPR headquarters in downtown St. Paul on Sunday, January 21st from 11 to 3. Tour the studios, meet your favorite hosts, and enjoy free entertainment at the Fitzgerald Theater. Go to npr.org and click on 40th anniversary in the shortcuts menu for details.
That's Alison Young performing the flute. Tell us about that music. I love that it almost seems there's an echo going on between the flute and the other
piano.
instruments, right?
Yeah, it's from Poema del Pastor Coxa, the Coxa Indians in Argentina. It's a piece by Angel La Sala, and was written for flute or violin and piano, and never, I'm not sure if it was recorded. I don't think the flutist has recorded it at all. I put it on my CD of Argentinian music. After I did a residency down there, and came back to the United States and recorded with one of my closest friends, Vicky Selden, a wonderful pianist. And what's interesting about it, it's got those pentatonic scales. It sounds very archaic, almost Asian, Indian, and then the rhythm and everything. We sort of recognize it. Can almost feel it like maybe American Indians, but it's South American. And it's the danza. We just had so much fun. I mean, you saw me as I was playing again, kind of moving along with it. Really a lot of fun making that disc.
You know, I thought when I met you that you would be someone who was restrained and kind of quiet. I mean, that's how I associate people that play the flute, because it strikes me as an instrument where you have to use a lot of restraint and discipline and precision. And I don't think of flute players as people who really cut loose and are as lively as you are.
Well, maybe I'm just special. I don't know. I think, yes, it's interesting. I mean, I obviously have two sides to my personality. There has to be the academic, the one who practices, the one who's very determined to make sure they get all the notes and everything correct. And to be a musician, you have to be willing to spend a lot of time alone. I mean, you have to practice all by yourself for the most part. You're not like the dancers always have class together. I kind of wished that was the way it was with the orchestra, but it wasn't. We practiced on our own. But what makes the difference between a solo flutist or, the principal flutist is someone who has a personality, someone who brings kind of some energy to what they do. And there was a very funny comment. I was a finalist for the Boston Symphony for principal flute, and it's a really great time. I went
when
tour
was
with them.
that?
That was a number of years ago, 10 years ago, something like that. And, I took an audition with 7 bazillion other flute players, and somehow I was one of the best. And I went and played with them and went on tour and all this kind of stuff. And the comment that Seiji Ozawa made about my playing was, Alison Young plays with fantasy. And of course, something a little lost in the translation. We wouldn't quite say that necessarily. It's something very special that he would say. But I think what he meant by it was that I didn't approach every phrase, this is the way it's done. Every flute player has played this particular solo this way, and I can repeat it verbatim. I would put some extra twist in it, hold that note just a little bit longer or vibrate it just a certain way. And, and it makes people listen. I mean, they paid attention. I mean, I didn't necessarily do that to get people to pay attention and listen. It was something that I felt was the way it should be played. But I think that's what made him interested. Unfortunately, I didn't get the job, but I was very close.
How much of it, though, Alison, is really open to interpretation? I think we look at someone like a violin player and we understand better that there are many interpretations that you can bring to the music. That's not, I guess, the way I thought about the flute. Obviously, I'm wrong about that. You can really bring your own ideas about what that music should sound like. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that I liked so much about my career was that I played in an orchestra and also played solo. So when you're playing solo and chamber music and stuff, you can begin to be more creative, bring more of your voice into it, especially if it's a solo flute piece. It's all about what you decide the music's going to be. When you play in an orchestra and you're a principal, you obviously want to have that kind of energy and vitality to your playing. But you also have to do what the conductor says. And I remember one time we were playing, it was that wonderful piece by Janacek. I can't think what it's called again, Sinfonietta. And the flutes have this kind of whirling stuff. And I asked him if he would do something for us, if he would conduct in a certain way to give us a little hand there. And I sort of felt that that's the way it should go. That would help our section and that would help me. And he stopped for a minute. I mean, this was in the middle of rehearsal. Everybody's listening, there goes that Alison again. And the conductor looked at me and he thought about it. He said, no. So the job is also to be able to be very flexible and do what the conductor wants, that you have to, that his way is the final way. And of course, if you can convince him that your way is better by playing in a certain way that's convincing.
I thought earlier that you said you thought about conducting.
Yeah, when I was very young, I wanted to be a conductor. I was discouraged from it because I was a very bad pianist. Somehow I couldn't get my hands to coordinate. But there are many, many wonderful conductors who had other primary instruments. In fact, Ransom Wilson is a flutist who became a conductor. Peter Unshin is a violinist who was with, I guess, a Tokyo String Quartet, also got dystonia, and is now a very successful conductor. I somehow... Either I missed the boat on that, I didn't get into it young enough, I sort of lost interest in all of that. It's a little bit of a hard life for a conductor if you're not at the top tier. You have to start out by conducting very small orchestras, probably difficult to get your career going, do a lot of fundraising for them and such.
So it's a long way up the ladder.
It's probably a long way up the ladder, and it didn't quite appeal to me. Teaching seemed more appealing, but then that avenue sort of didn't quite work out either. And so I wanted to do something completely different.
We have an online question here from Bill in Bethlehem who says, what advice would you give to other people who find that there's some unknown force, changing their plans for their life, really intervening and forcing people in a new direction?
Wow, that's a wonderful question. What has surprised me, I got some many responses when I knew that this was a serious condition, that this was not just, I'm going to get therapy and it's going to be over. It's just going to be a few years haul, that really it was going to be a huge changing of my life. One fella said, if that happened to me, I would commit suicide. I mean, it was just so dark. But I have to say that when I heard that, I could identify slightly with that feeling of just absolute despair. And then there were other people that say, well, I know you, Alison, you can do anything. There's other things to do. So there was sort of that other side. And, you're weighing out all these feelings you have. I think that, I think what's important is to enjoy and hold on to the things in our lives that we love and emphasize them as much as we can. I mean, remember the blessings that we have as we have them, in the moments that we have them, and know that life is temporary life and everything is changing and is moving on. And to have faith and have trust in that. I mean, whether you're a religious or spiritual person or not, we do know that life goes on. And there will be something that fills the vacuum, and to have faith in that. A very wise person said to me many years ago, before this ever occurred to me, happened to me, that if the universe is saying no to us, if it's giving us a resounding no, then that is the answer. You need to let go, because you create this vacuum for something to fill it in. If you hang on, you can't let amazing things happen. I mean, amazing thing that happened to me is to come here, which wasn't even in my plans at all.
Do you feel like you have any commonality with athletes who sustain, a career-ending injury, or someone who, someone who might be on a path that they've dedicated a lot of time and resources into and decided, this is what I am? I mean, do you feel like you have more, common experience with musicians who have been through this, or do you think you can really identify with, let's say, the athlete who is injured and that's it? That's abruptly it.
Right. I mean, you hear these horrible stories of a pitcher who goes out on his first season in the majors and yanks the shoulder, and they can do surgeries, but he can never pitch at 90 miles an hour again or whatever. It's yes, I do identify with that, to answer your question. And certainly the loneliness of it, the isolation, it's very difficult for people on the path. I mean, they are, my friends were musicians, and they were working and they were playing and they were doing, and I was falling behind, and it was hard for them. I mean, I'm not entirely angry or resentful, because I understand that it's very difficult to have sympathy or understanding for someone who's falling to the sidelines when you have your own considerations. Right. Yes, there's a lot of loneliness in it and isolation in it, and we don't really prepare ourselves for inevitable loss.
Well, how would you do that, though?
Well, there's a little dark side to me, too. You know, my parents are getting older, and I see them getting more frail, and I think I'm going to be there someday, too. And I certainly have an understanding of sort of the limits of life. And I think that frees you. I don't think it's something that suddenly you're more careful or you're afraid or you become depressed. I think it's something that says, okay, but right now I'm healthy. I'm not healthy enough to play the flute. That's the only thing I can't do. But otherwise, I'm a pretty healthy person. So I bike commute to work every single day, even on days when the temperature's dropping, I hear. I bike commute. I'm active. I do things while I can. And know that at some point I'll have to shift again. I'll have to change. And I have resources, too, because I know I can, because I just did. I changed careers.
You said when we were off the air that it is not unheard of for this disease to move into other parts of the body, and that you can't entirely dismiss the idea that it could move into your throat. Or
That's right. That's right.
How do you push that back and say, I'm just not going to worry about that? Or do you?
Well, I think that it's fairly rare for this condition to show up somewhere else. That's been the kind of the record on it. There was a violinist who got it in the same place I did, in his left hand, his fingering hand, and so what he did was he taught himself to finger with his right hand, completely switched sides on the violin.
Wow.
And then the exact same symptoms showed up in the right hand, because it is a brain disorder, a neurological disorder. But it's unlikely that he would have had it show up somewhere else. That seems to be the case. I think for me, what I do is I say, as I just mentioned, I'm resourceful. I know that I found another career after this one. After flute playing, I became a radio host. And if I can't do that, I'll do something else. You know, I'll find something else to do if I can't use my voice. If for some reason I developed dystonia in my larynx or something else, you know. And I'm not entirely sure if that's a dark way to look at life or if that's a more realistic way to look at life. Or, as I said, I think it's something that sort of frees me.
And having been through what you've been through, it is natural to say, so what will I do maybe the next time, right? Mm-hmm. Let's hear. I think we have a flute concerto queued up here. David Diamond flute concerto. Tell me a bit about this.
David Diamond is one of the major American composers. He wrote this flute concerto for Jean-Pierre Rampal, who premiered it, but Rampal became very ill and unable to play so well towards the end of his life. So the piece had never been recorded. And I was putting together a CD of American music for flute and orchestra. It was an idea with a friend of mine who's a conductor. We were going to go. We went to the Czech Republic and recorded this. I mean, it's all kind of this wild plan that we had. But we wanted to find music that had never been recorded. I mean, that seemed to be the best thing to do. So we were accepting scores from all over the place. We put sort of an all-points bulletin out on all these different sites and stuff, and accepting scores and reading through them. It's crazy. And one of my friends studied with David Diamond at Juilliard and then at the Eastman School. And he said, I think he wrote something. And we were kind of in a conversation about it. So I made a cold call. Actually, I think I wrote him a letter first. But I just sort of said, hi, I'm Alison Young. I play the flute and I'm pretty good. And my friend is Todd Frazier. And he said, to ask you about your flute concerto. And David Diamond said, I'd love to send it to you, but could you send me a tape of your playing? I mean, he wanted to audition me first.
Who are you?
Right? Yeah. He didn't want to go just by the student's word. And so I sent him a tape, and he said, okay, and sent me the score. And my friend, the same woman that I made the Argentinian CD with, she and I sat down and learned this concerto. And I've got to say that playing the keyboard part that's supposed to be this huge symphony orchestra is unbelievable. So we'd be like in our bathrobes in the middle of the night, playing and working and working. And I learned this concerto in a month. It was very, very technically difficult, and went to the Czech Republic and recorded it. And
you learned it in a month?
Yeah, I had good technique back then. And I was very disciplined. I had a little metronome going and took lots of breaks, and I learned it. But it's just kind of constant. I think that the cadenza, I haven't looked at it in a long time, it's like 3 pages long of just kind of constant, lots of notes.
It is beautiful. Alison, do you think the flute gets overshadowed sometimes in orchestras? Because, when I go to the symphony, I think my attention is inevitably drawn to the big power instruments, piano, the violins. Do you think is that something that you flute players grumble about among yourselves when you get together?
Well, there aren't as many great concertos written for the flute as there are for the violin and the piano. Surely, I mean, there's a dearth of music, and if any composers are listening, go ahead and write a flute concerto. But the flute is really a color instrument in the orchestra. Obviously, they have solos, very important passages, and the flute has a particular kind of timbre that music's written for it. In particular, I was just thinking about that comment a moment ago about Seiji Ozawa. The piece he was referring to was Daphnis and Chloe, which is a work by Ravel, and there's this gorgeous extended flute solo sort of towards the end of the ballet, where it's a pantomime. They're telling the story of Pan and Syrinx, and of course Pan played the panpipes, so the solo really has to be in the flute. It has to be that color of sound. It's a huge moment. I mean, the orchestra just sort of disappears, and the flute rises up. And can you imagine the experience? I'm just getting goosebumps thinking about the feeling can't even speak. The feeling that was like sitting in the orchestra for me when I played with Boston, and you have these musicians all around you. I mean, that was probably part of the reason I wanted to play a solo instrument. And they're all there for you to shine. So there are many, many solos, but as far as concertos, I think Adam Kunzel is doing a flute major. Well, I know he is. He's doing a major flute concerto next year, but how many times does a flutist actually stand up in front of the orchestra and solo compared to a violin and pianist? So much less.
There are moments of power, but they're somewhat few and far between.
And we also have, we don't have the kind of range of dynamic or sound. I mean, that's one of the limitations of the flute. You're always working to create a different type of timbre from Mozart to Brahms to Debussy. I mean, they have to be different, and sometimes you listen to a tape or something, they sound kind of the same. It's not that much different as on a piano.
I'm curious about, since you are still immersed in classical music, what you make of this report that came out of the National Endowment for the Arts about the decline in listening to classical music stations and, diminishing number of stations who are playing that kind of music. Do you think classical music is simply not that appealing to this next generation with their iPods and,
Oh, I don't think so. And I think the iPod is actually going to be useful to classical music.
How so?
There was just a report, and forgive me, I didn't read it that carefully, but that one of the biggest downloads was classical music. And I think, this doom and gloom thing has been going on for decades, really. I mean, in the 70s, they were talking about it's going to be the end of classical music, and this keeps coming up sort of year after year. And then you see these trends happening. I mean, the Minnesota Orchestra had a composers concert and initiative where all of these composers came from around the country and had their music played by the orchestra, and then 9 were chosen for this concert, and it was packed. And people were just, and this is new music. I mean, that's the hard stuff. It's easy to listen to.
That's the hard sell, you mean?
Yeah.
To get people interested.
I mean, it's the hard stuff to listen to because, well, for one thing, no one had ever heard it before because it's absolutely brand new. But, Tchaikovsky, Swan Lake. Okay, I know I can handle that. Beethoven 5. Okay, I pretty much know how that goes. I know my evening will be okay, but I won't be that challenged maybe as something new. So I think it might be a matter of how we deliver the music, the new downloads, making the downloads available on iPods, the way we deliver it. We're always talking about this at Minnesota Public Radio, how we make things available online. We make them available in iPods or podcasts. I can't think of all the names of things. How we present them on the radio. I mean, it's very important for me as a classical music host to not dumb things down so much, but also not talk like an academic.
Yeah, I wonder how you classical music hosts find that right balance, because the story behind the music is very interesting, but you don't want to be too elementary.
That's right.
In telling the story of the music, right? How do you find the balance?
Well, for me, it's never seemed that difficult because my family is not a family of musicians. So every time I've had to talk with them about what I'm doing. In fact, it was very funny. My mother just very recently came and we went to an SPCO concert, and she turned to me and said, "What's the difference between a concerto and a sonata?" And I thought, I've been playing, Mom, for 20 some years. Where you been? And I explained to her, and then we listened. It was when they were doing the Beethovens, all the Beethoven symphonies and concertos, and I said, okay, I'm going to just write on this paper, and I'm going to show you when the things happen. Here's the exposition. Here's the first theme. Okay, listening. Okay, and it was while it was happening, and I said, here's the second theme. And then by the time we got to the recapitulation, when the themes were coming back, she was like, oh, wait, there it is. Okay, I got it. And so, she's a very educated, very smart woman. She's not, she has a master's degree. She knows about music. She played music. But this part of it that she didn't know. And I don't think she felt like I don't think so. I don't think she thought I was pandering to her or anything. I was just describing it and making it fun, making it something that she could listen to and enjoy.
You can hear Alison Young make classical music fun on Saturday and Sunday mornings on the Classical Music Service here at Minnesota Public Radio, KSJN 99.5. Alison, good to have you here. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you so much.
Alison Young playing the flute. You're listening to Minnesota Public Radio. I'm Kerri Miller.